Okay, tonight's tutorial is going to focus on the part mode of FSDS. And again, there are three, I guess there is actually, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 6 different modes you can work in. But the majority of the work you're going to do is going to be in part mode or point mode, and occasionally polygon mode. You will do some work in the cross-section mode. Animation mode is going to be used to animate parts, and then template mode is a little feature where you can draw pre-made shapes from pre-made templates or two-dimensional templates, and FSDS will essentially extrude a part based on the template, the two-dimensional template that you've drawn. But we're going to focus on part mode tonight, which is represented by the little cube icon here. And you can get into part mode simply by pressing F5 if you want. That's the shortcut key on the keyboard, or pressing the little cube icon up here. So I'm going to talk about all the different things you can do in part mode tonight. I might just use a couple different examples. Over here on the left side are the 8 pre-made parts that FSDS comes already preloaded with. Every single object that you ever model in FSDS is going to be, started from a single part, a single box or a tube or a disc or a sphere or whatever. But to get that box made, all you have to do is select it, obviously, and it'll bring it up. But how you want to manipulate that part is where you're going to change to either part mode or poly mode or point mode or cross-section mode or whatnot. So we're going to focus only on part mode in this little tutorial. I'm going to try to show you all the different things you can do in part mode without ever leaving part mode. And again, I'll try to use just a couple different examples of a box or a tube and show you again all the different things you can do. So let's bring up a box real quick. We'll select in the box icon, and I'll just use 20, 20, 20, which are feet tonight. I'll use origin at center, and actually I want to use origin at bottom. I wanted to get you guys into the habit of, if you're going to design scenery with FSDS, down here in the different axes that you can see, here's up and down and left and right. This middle axis actually represents the plane of the Earth in the simulator. So if you go ahead and select axis at bottom, and the part shows up, it'll always show up above ground. If you don't do this, I'll show you the difference. If you select origin at center versus origin at bottom, if you select origin at center, notice where the part shows up. It's going to show up, in this case, if this line right here represents the plane of the Earth in game, it's going to show up half above ground and half below ground. So you may build this pristine looking structure, hangar, whatever, and if you don't move it, either move it up to the ground level, or if you don't design it and start with it with origin at the bottom at the ground level, it's going to be partially below ground. So don't make that mistake. So the easy way to do that, again, is to, when you select your part, and you can do it for tube as well, origin at end in this case if you want, always make sure that you design with it at that plane. You don't have to start with it with origin at bottom or origin at center. You can do center, but just make sure you move it up to the ground level. Again, if you do that, you might learn that the hard way. Again, that's usually only it takes only one time to do that the hard way, and you make all this great scenery and you get it in game and you realize it's half below ground, the entire portion of it. So don't make that mistake. So that's first little advice tonight. Make sure you always design for scenery up on the ground level plane. Now if you're designing an aircraft, you actually do want it to be in the middle for three-dimensional space purposes. So that's a whole different ballgame. We're going to focus on scenery and objects first for the first couple tutorials. We'll talk about aircraft later. Alright, so we're only going to focus on part mode tonight. We're going to do other tutorials on polygon mode and point mode and even cross-section mode, animate mode, all that kind of good stuff. So part mode it is. We're going to stick to that. I'm going to bring up a part. I'm just going to use a box. I'm going to make it 20 wide, 20 high, and 20 deep. And I'll make it origin at the bottom so it's sitting up on the plane so that we're being good scenery designers here. Again, just for review, to center the part, all you ever have to do is hit the C key on your keyboard, okay, and it's always going to bring your part, and it's going to zoom in as far as it can zoom in and still keep your part visible in all 3 design windows. Over here in the three-dimensional preview window, the preview pane, it's going to depend on how big your object is essentially. But remember, you can always center that up if you have multiple parts. Okay, let me just show you this real quick. If you have multiple parts and I paste a bunch of different parts out here and I move them around so that you're kind of spread out. Let's say these are 5 different buildings. If I hit center, right, it's gonna center up on that particular building, as you can see over here, or part, or whatever you want to call it. If I want to center up on the entire project or on the entire contents of all the different parts, I can hit Shift and C, or Shift and Center at the same time, and that'll center up on the entire project. Okay, so that's just a difference there. Get rid of all those guys. Again, to zoom into your part in the design windows, you use the I key for in, okay, the O key for out. You can also use these magnifying glass looking things up here, icons. Okay, but generally, if you just hit C, it'll bring it in, it'll zoom it in as far as you want to go. If you just want to zoom in on your preview pane over here, you can use the solid view control panel. You can use the zoom slider. Okay, but I actually find the shortcut keyboard, or the keyboard shortcut, a little bit easier, which is just hold down the Shift key and hit I for in or O for out. So holding the Shift key down, I or O, will zoom in or out in your preview pane or preview window only. Okay, so we're going to talk about part mode and all the different things you can do in part mode. So again, the different modes are going to be part mode, polygon mode, point mode, cross section mode, animate mode, and template mode. But again, we're going to focus on part mode tonight. And with any of these modes, there's 3 different functions to choose from as far as how you want to alter the part that you're working with. So I'll try not to confuse them. I'll try to call these functions, and I'll try to call these modes. So part mode and move function, rotate function, or scale function. So you have 3 functions for each mode essentially that you're going to work in. Move function, rotate function, and scale function. Since we're in part mode, the way that these 3 functions are going to work is that they're going to affect the entire part at the same time. It's going to consider each individual part that you're working with or designing with as a whole object, and it's going to move it accordingly, or rotate it accordingly, or scale it accordingly. So it actually makes it very simple. You know, in move function is what we'll call it. In the move function, even though they call it move mode, I'll call it the move function. It'll simply move the entire part around the 3-dimensional design plane. Okay, just something to note. To see which of these active windows that you're in, notice when I click on each window, you get this yellow highlighted box around the edges. That just lets you visually know which of the design windows or design panes that you're in. Okay, to move a part, or to affect a part, or to make a change to a part or a point or whatever, you know, in that window, you have to have that highlighted. You have to be in that window. The changes will show up in the other windows, but in order to actually physically do it, you have to be in that window. If you ever hear FSDS make a tone like a, let's see if I can do it here. No, it's not going to do it. It may just be because you're not in an active window. If you're over here and you're trying to, you know, move your part around or something, it may kind of chirp at you, and that's just because you're not in an active window. So get back into an active window. So again, move function, I'm in part mode and I'm in move function. It's going to treat the part as one whole object, and it's going to, you know, move the whole object at the same time. Notice when I'm using the move function in part mode, it's only going to move it in 2 of the 3 axes in any one of these windows. So in the top down view, which is this upper left window, I can move it in the Z axis, or the Z plane, which is back and forth, forward and back, or I can move it in the X axis, which is right to left. But notice through the other 2 windows down here, okay, notice when I'm moving it up here in the top down view, it's not moving up or down in the Y axis. Again, that's because I can only move it in 2 of the 3 axes at any one time in these design windows. If I want to move it in the Y axis, I have to choose one of the design windows that allow me to move it in the Y axis. And the way you can tell is just look down here where it says back, and you see how it says X and Y. That's telling you which of the 2 axes you can use. Same thing with here, Z and Y. So just something to keep in mind. Now that I'm down here in one of these 2 windows, I can move it up and down. Okay, so in this top left, I can move it forward and back, which is Z. I can move it left and right, which is X. In the bottom left, I can move it up and down, which is Y, and I can move it left and right, which is the X-axis. In the bottom right, I can move it as it looks on screen, and this is where you have to wrap your head around this and wrap your brain around it. I'm moving it left to right on screen, but because this is the view that looks at the part from the right side looking through to the left, okay, notice your axis indicators down here. When I move it to the right on this screen down here, in reality, in three-dimensional space, I'm moving it forward. And notice the change up here. Notice up here when I move it backwards, notice what it'll do in the bottom right-hand screen. Okay, so part of this process of learning to design in FSDS is wrapping your head around this three-dimensional axis and wrapping your head around these three different design windows. And notice when I move it, you know, the changes are reflected essentially in all three windows, even though you're only working in one. So even though it's technically left to right here, it's really, note the z-axis here and note the z-axis here, it's really forward to back. Okay. So just something to keep in mind. So again, I can only move in two of the three axes at any one time. While I'm working in the part mode, I can actually constrain, or I can prevent the part from moving in one, two, or all three of the axes at one time. There are different reasons you want to do this. For example, if you have your part, like we talked about, it's nice and flat. It's on the, it's on the flat plane surface of the in-game simulator. I do not want it to move from that, because if I move it up, now it's going to hover. Even if I design it the way I think I should design it, it's going to hover, in this case, about 10 feet off the ground. So I want to get this thing nice and snugged up to the ground. And just visually, I'll just eyeball it for now. And now I don't want to let it move from there, and I want to be able to be free to go to my different windows and move it in different locations or different ways, but I just want to make sure it doesn't move up and down, which is again the y-axis. So to prevent that, I can go up here to the constrain feature and I can select Y, and now I can come down here into this the bottom left design window, and I can try, and trust me, I'm trying, and I know you'll just have to take my word for it. I'm trying to move it up and down by left clicking and holding it down and moving the mouse, and it's not going anywhere, and that's because I've constrained it to not allow it to move in the Y direction. Okay, so that's how these things come into play. If you have your part exactly where you want it and you don't want it to move, okay, we can move up to this window, the top window up here. And let's say in this example, okay, I don't want it to move in the y-axis. Well, we already talked about it's not going to move in the y-axis using this design window because it can only move in the two axes that have the little vectors here, the z and the x. So I don't have to do anything in that case. If I just want to move it left or right or forward or back up here, it's not going to move up or down. But just to be sure, you probably should get into the habit of always constraining the one or two directions that you don't want it to move in. Let's say I don't want it to move left or right and I don't want it to move up or down. I'll just go ahead and constrain those two, up and down being y, left and right being x. I'll just go ahead and constrain them right now so that I can just hop around to my different windows and not have to worry about it. Okay? So now I can move this guy forward and back all I want, but I can't move him left or right, and I can't move him up and down. Okay? And because I've constrained x and y, notice this, I can't move an x or y, and what are the two axes I can work in down here in the back view? X and Y. So I can come down here, notice again the box is highlighting it, I'm working in this window, and I can try all day to move this part, but because I'm trying to move it in the two different axes that are allowed to be moved in this particular view, it's not going to move. Okay, so what I've got it set up for right now is that it can only move forward and back. Okay, so that's what the constrain function will do for you in the move mode. It doesn't do anything for you in the rotate mode. You can try to constrain it all you want, but the part is still going to rotate. It will work in the scale mode. Okay, but again, as far as moving it, if it's not constrained, I can move it three-dimensionally, no problem. If I want to constrain one of the dimensions, let's say the up and down dimension, I can do Y, and it can't move up and down, but I can still move forward, backward, left, or right. And yes, if you're already thinking ahead, if I constrain all three at the same time, I can't move the part at all. The part is essentially locked in its three-dimensional position. Okay, so that's what the constraint functions will do in the move function or the rotate mode. Let's just call it rotate mode, move mode. I'll just call it what it is while we're working in the overall part mode. Okay, let's switch to rotate mode while we're working in part mode. Rotate mode, again, just like it sounds, it's going to rotate the part. The difference between rotate and move is that in the move mode I can actually move my part in 2 axes at one time, at any one time in these different design windows. However, when I'm in rotate mode, I can only rotate about 1 axis at a time in any one of these 3 windows. Okay, and normally that axis, let me get my part back to where it should be here. Just double check it, half a degree off. Normally that axis that it's going to rotate about, if you're trying to figure it out, is going to be the one that's in the center of the axis indicator down here. So right here is the top view, and I'm in rotate mode. It's going to rotate around the y-axis, or the vertical axis. Okay. If I switch down here to the back view, again, note the z-axis is now the one that doesn't have a vector on it, so it's going to rotate around the forward and back axis, or what's known as the longitudinal axis for an aircraft. And then over here in the right mode, again, it shows you the x-axis is the one that's going to not allow it to move around, so or it's going to rotate around the x-axis, or the lateral axis in this case, all day long. And notice, I want you to notice something. Notice that the part is actually rotating around the axis. Okay, so in this case it's rotating around the bottom here. That's the difference. Remember when we designed this part, I'll delete it here so you can see this. When I brought this up, I had origin at bottom. Okay, it probably should say axis at bottom. If I do origin at center, watch the difference when I try to rotate this. Notice now, again, it's designed so it's sitting half above and half below the ground plane. But notice the axis is now in the center, and now when I rotate it, now it rotates literally right around the center point of its axis. Okay, whereas before it was rotating down here, and I'll show you a little trick here. I can actually move the axis only. Before it was like that, and whoops, and it was rotating around the axis point. Okay. So again, we're still in part mode, and by the way, how I did that, how I moved just the axis only. Okay, I went into move mode and I held down the shift key, and by holding down the shift key I can move the axis of the part around to anywhere in 3-dimensional space that I want. So let's put it right there, okay, and just show you why you might want to do that. And now I'll move to rotate, or I'll go to rotate, and notice it rotates around the axis. So depending on how you want to move a part, it might be useful to be able to move only the axis. And again, to move the axis or to rotate the axis, you can do both. You hold down the shift key. So I want to move it back to the center, so I'll go to move, I'll hold down the shift key, and I'll move it, roughly back into the center. And just to show you, I can do rotate as well with the axis only. So I'll hold down the shift key and I can rotate the axis. You can also assign numerical values to this. If, again, we're in part mode up here, if I hit F2, okay, this brings up the part properties box. Notice it shows the axis location in 3-dimensional space, and it shows the rotation. So if I put this back to 0, okay, that will bring it back to, let's see, that will bring the rotation back to 0. And if I want the actual axis to go back to 0, 0, 0, I can do that. 0, 0, and it's only going to move the axis. Well, I guess it moved the whole part, didn't it? So maybe we have to go up here and move the whole axis. So shift to move the axis only in the move mode, and move that guy up there like so. Okay. Delete that, and we'll start over here just so we get a nice clean slate. So that's how I move just the axis only. So I can, using the move mode, I can move the part. Hold down the shift key, I can move the axis. That's all that's is there. And there are going to be times when you're trying to texture an object where you want to move the axis a little bit because it'll apply the texture a little bit differently. There's also going to be times when you change the shape of your object or of your part, and that will change where the axis is located. And to always center the axis back up, you can always go up here to part and then center axis to part. Okay, if you end up rotating the axis, so rotate, shift key, rotate, you can go up here to part, and you can set either reset part rotation if the part was rotated, or you can reset the axis rotation. Okay, and center that back up. So it's always important to try to always design your object so that the axis is centered, because when you go to put your texture on, you want your texture to be to be applied evenly. If you don't apply it, or if you don't put the axis back in the center, it may or may not apply your texture evenly. Okay, so we're in part mode, and we talked about move mode or move function and rotate function. Pretty self-explanatory. We'll go to scale function now. Again, very self-explanatory. It just scales it up or down. If you hold the left mouse button down and drag it, okay, and notice no matter which window I choose in scale mode, it scales in all three directions, Y, X, and Z. Okay, so in this case, it's scaling symmetrically. Doesn't matter which window I do, bottom right, top left, it's going to scale symmetrically. Now, if I want to only scale it in one direction or in one axis, I can do that, and I can use the constraint functions to do that. So let's say I only want to make it scale it bigger left and right, but I don't want it to get bigger forward and back, and I don't want it to get taller up and down. So I'll constrain the Y and I'll constrain the Z, and now I can scale it all day long just in the x-axis. If I want to scale it just in the z-axis, I can do that. Okay. And if I want to scale it just in the y-axis, I can do that. If I want to scale it in the y and the z but not in the x, I can do that. If I want to scale it in the the x and the z but not the y, I can do that. So there's all kinds of combinations you can do. If I constrain all three, I can't do anything to it. Okay. So again, we're working in part mode and we're working in scale. And it's pretty self-explanatory. If you unselect scale and you reselect scale, notice all three of your constrainments have dropped off. Okay. So if I have them all highlighted, or let's say I just have two of the three highlighted, if I unselect scale and I go back to it all of a sudden because I want to do something, I forgot to do it, I have to reselect the constrainment functions. Okay. So that's part mode, and there's not a lot more to it other than different parts. So again, in part mode, I can delete the entire part by just hitting the delete key on the keyboard. Let's bring up a tube real quick just for reference here. And let's see, center, zoom in. Okay, and I can do the same functions with the tube. I can move it in the 3-axis. I can rotate it about the axis that it's on. And notice again, origin at this point is at the bottom. So this is like a, I don't know, like an anti-aircraft gun or a cannon or something, or a windshield wiper. Okay. Again, notice if I want to move the axis, go to move mode, hold down the shift key, move the axis up here, and now I want to go back to rotate, it rotates around the axis. Okay, so that's a useful feature. And notice the different windows, it's going to rotate around different axes. So you can literally manipulate a part or a piece or whatever to just about any shape, any angle, whatever you want, by moving the axis around, by moving the part around. And again, we haven't even touched polygon mode or point mode yet, and we're showing you all the different functions you can do just in the part mode. So delete this guy. Flat polygon is considered a part. It's going to ask you how many sides you want, the radius. Okay. You know, and then it's going to ask you the perpendicular axis. This is a little bit hard to figure out. You have to think about if you want, let's say a part. Let's say you want to make, just for example, a plate that you would set on a table. Well, when you set the plate down, the top side of the plate where you would put the food, what axis is that? Okay. What is perpendicular? In other words, well, it would be the y-axis would be perpendicular to the flat plane of your plate. So in other words, what makes a right angle to your plate when it's sitting on the dinner table? Which axis is that? In that case, it's the y-axis. So that's what it's asking you down here. So if I select y, again in part mode, bring up a new part, okay, it simply makes the y-axis, notice right here, perpendicular to the actual polygon surface that gets drawn. Okay, so y-axis here is perpendicular. Here we're looking straight down from the top, so we're actually looking down the y-axis, so there is no perpendicular up here in the top view. But that's what it's asking you. And just to show you the difference, go back here and select X. Okay, so if X is the perpendicular axis, okay, notice that's over here. That's the perpendicular axis. That's the perpendicular axis over here. It's there, right? Because it's only rendered on one side because it's a flat polygon. So it's there. Delete that. A couple more things before we finish tonight about part mode. Again, each of these pre-made parts, when you select it, will come up with its own parameters where you can change those. What else? In the actual part menu, let's bring up a part so we have something to work with. You have a couple different things here. Part menu. You have add. You can add, again, this is just doing the same thing from this menu up here. You can add a tube, no big deal there. You can save. So let's say you make a really neat part that you're going to use over and over and over and over again. A set of hangar doors, for example. You can actually save it as an individual part, and the next time you work on a different project, you can import that part into your project. Okay, and that would be, save it initially, load it after that. Create a part file merge list. That's a little bit more advanced. Select by name if you want to do that. Let me make a bunch of parts here real quick. Alright, I just made 11 different boxes. They all look the same here because they're all on top of each other, but you can see I'll start moving them around here, and you can see that they're actually a bunch of different boxes, and move it and move it. Okay, just to show you, you've got this whole, and again, Shift Center or Shift C to get the whole thing in view. You've got this whole collection of parts, and maybe you know exactly which part you want to get to because you named it something unique. If you want to get to that, hit F3, and that'll bring up your part list. Okay, and these are all the same just because I've copied them. It was a box and I copied it, so its first one is box.1, box. Let's see, where is it at? 2, box.3. Note the name is going to be the name. It's always going to be listed in alphabetical order, but the number behind the actual part is the number it was created. So box 0 was first, box 1 was 1, box 2 was created, well, in this case, third, box 3 was fourth, so on and so forth. So your part order is the set of numbers out here. Your part names will be in alphabetical order, but the part actual numbers that they were created in, or that they sit in the project, will be out here in the back. So this box 10 is the very last part. So I want to show you something. If I double click on box 0, it selects that. Bring up F3 again, double click on box 8, it selects that. F3 again for me. Just single click on any one of them and hit select, and it'll bring it over here. I can single click on another one, it'll bring it over here, it'll remove it from the window. Okay, make current. So you can select them, and you can select one and make it current, or you can hold the control key down and select all three, hit make current. Okay, and all three now, you can see I can move 3 different parts at once, and I'm not even moving the current part, which is in orange. But so there's, again, a trillion different ways to do the same thing in FSDS. And again, part mode, you can get the part mode. F5 is a shortcut key. Okay, I can delete if I've got a bunch of different ones highlighted. I can delete that. The current part, in this case, in my setup, is orange. If I hit delete, it deletes that one. Hello, deletes that one. Deletes that one, deletes that one, deletes that one, deletes that one, until we're back to original part. Snap to scale is going to be something we're going to talk about when we're using points. Clone is if I want to make 15 copies of the same part, and I just don't want to do it 15 times, copy paste, I can clone it, and it'll ask you how many. You select it, and it'll ask you how many copies you want to make in the distance. So let's make 15 copies that are each 10 feet from each other in the x-axis. Voila. It spits out 15 different copies of the same thing at a certain distance. That's all that does. Delete, 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 delete. Okay. Again, notice how this guy's out here. If I want to bring him back, and again, we're in part mode, I want to bring him back to the middle axis location. Notice he's 150 feet over to the right. Let's put that back to 0, and it brings him right back to the middle. Okay. Notice he's rotated a little bit. I don't want it to be rotated anymore. Notice the rotation is at negative 46.50, and we're back to where we started. Okay. I can move this part by just moving it numerically. I can move it up, using this guy, or I can actually come into F2, which is a part properties, and notice my axis location. Let's see, it's at 3. So this is a 20 foot box. If I make this 10, that should make it on the level plane, which it did. Okay, so you can do that way. Textures, which will bring up the texture assignment when we have a set of textures. What else for part? Make texture templates. We don't want to do that. Display texture list. We don't want to do that. Center axis to part. We talked about that again. If I want to move the axis, I can be in move mode. I can hold the shift key down and I can move the axis. And notice I'm trying to move it left and right. It's not, and the reason is because it's constrained right now. So let's get rid of that. just to show you how this works. I want to get this, I want to center the part back, or center the axis back to the part, because again, the texture is not going to go on correctly if you don't do this. So I'll go part, center axis to part, and it centers the axis right back up. And again, same thing, hold down the shift key, rotate mode, rotate that, and let's see, get out of that. And I want to reset the axis rotation so it's level again. So part's already level, reset axis rotation, it goes back. Same thing here, if I rotate the whole part, I can actually go back and let's see, part reset, part rotation, boom, back to that. Strip all preprocesses, and these are keyframes. These are related to animation. We're not going to talk about that. And deleting orphan points, we'll talk about that when we do points. And fixing surface normals is something a little bit different. So that's essentially the functions when you're working in part mode. You can move it, you can rotate it, and you can scale it. Okay, and you can constrain. When you scale something, you can constrain it, or when you move something, you can constrain it. If I go into rotate mode and I try to constrain it, I can select all three, and you can see it has absolutely no effect on it whatsoever. So the constrainment doesn't work in the rotating mode. That's all I want you to know there. Okay, so that wraps up our working with a part in part mode, part of our tutorial tonight. We'll do the next time we'll talk about point mode, and then we'll talk about polygon mode after that, and eventually we'll get on to making a hangar structure here and making some scenery. So that's the first tutorial. Come see us at the Military AI Works forums if you have any questions for us, and we'll get these tutorials out to you as quick as we can, and we'll start making some cool stuff. Thanks.